Yeah, she knows I'm recording. Okay, I think I'm live everywhere. If not, maybe someone will come tell me. So we'll go ahead and get started then. I'll minimize this or pull it down here. Okay. Well, welcome to the North Carolina Maritime Museum. My name is Ben, and I work on the education staff here. And I'm just one of the staff members that gives these lectures that we have scheduled as part of our Maritime Heritage Series. Today's topic is North Carolina's surfing history. I think the last presentation was done by David Bennett on the fisheries of the Neuse River. Hopefully you watched that. If you didn't, it is available through the museum's website and YouTube page. It's been recorded and lives on the internet now, much like this presentation will. So thank you all for coming today, and thank you for anyone watching online. This is being recorded, so you will be able to watch it again later. And if you can't stand the sound of my voice, you can put it on mute and just go along with the slideshow. I tried to put the information on each slide there. The next lecture that we have will be near the end of the month, April 28th, and my co-worker, Christine Brin, will be talking about sea monsters. So that's April 28th. Make sure you come check that one out. So let's go ahead and get started here. What I have set up is basically a slideshow, and I'm going to be giving this presentation and telling you what we're looking at in the pictures. And I'm obviously covering North Carolina's surfing history. So I'm going to try to look at and figure out when did surfing start in North Carolina, and kind of what those early years were like, and bring us on up to kind of the modern day activity related to the sport. So I've got a lot to go over, and I hope that you all enjoy the presentation. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try and answer them. If the questions come in online, it's probably easier for me to get to those at the end of the presentation, unless I have some of the staff here helping me out. But I'm going to go ahead and get started anyway. This first picture we see was actually from the Surfer magazine in 1967 issue. The picture was actually taken in 1966 in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. So there was actually an article in that magazine that was done about surfing in North Carolina in 1966. But we're going to go back a little farther than that. I just put up a mix of images here to kind of show you like part of what I did to get this story and put it together. If you've been through our museum gallery, you've seen an exhibit about this topic, surfing in North Carolina and its history. You've seen some surfboards, some of the gear, surfboard wax, some pictures, and if you read the text, that's what this presentation was derived from. Our research that we did here at the museum to put together that exhibit, and we also put together a little educational booklet, and you all get to take some copies home today. That was your reward for coming into the museum. I'll give you a copy of that. Surfing NC. It's available online as well in a PDF format. So we're going to learn more about North Carolina's surfing history, but these are just some things that we came across and other people shared with us that had an interest in the sport. And each one of these has kind of some significance to them, but we have a postcard from I think 1917, some advertisement from a newspaper. In the upper right, you see an article from 1928 talking about Virginia Dare Day up in Dare County. It was a celebration that happened every year. I'm going to go over that, and then we see a picture of some people on the beach in the middle of the page at top, and there's actually someone that's becoming an honorary member of the Kitty Hawk Surf Club, so he's getting a license plate, and it was the gentleman on the right. He was actually the one getting the license plate as honorary member of this surf club, if you will. He actually tried to paddle a surfboard from New York to Miami, and he ran into some trouble here in Carteret County. Someone on a fishing pier threw a Pepsi bottle at him, hit him in the head. He ended up having to go get stitches at the hospital in Morehead City. But the surfer and fisherman relationship is something that can sometimes be contentious. I may talk about that more later. And then a magazine, Atlantic Surfing, picture up there. But anyway, I threw this picture in here because sometimes you'll say, yeah, people surfing in North Carolina, and they'll say, yeah, people can surf here. There's waves here. How do they do that? There's no surf here. Well, there sure is surf here, and this picture is proof. This was taken on the Outer Banks. This is in Dare County. You can see the surfer there doing a bottom turn as he's getting ready to set up and maybe get in the barrel. Some tube riding. You'll have to excuse my lingo here, but this is a program about surfing, so you're going to hear some of that. And full disclaimer, I am a surfer. I'm guilty. Someone asked if I was one, and yes, I am. There's another one in the room. So yes, there is surf here, and it's not always like this. It doesn't always look this good. This is some really high quality stuff here that we're looking at right here. But yeah. So the Surfing NC Timeline Project, this is going back to what I was talking about, where we did some research and we wanted to learn more about the sport of surfing. The other sports in North Carolina have ended up in the Museum of History in Raleigh. I think there's a whole sports hall of fame up at the museum in Raleigh, and they don't have surfing in it that I know of. I haven't been up there in a while, but why not surfing? It's considered a sport. People compete at it. It's, for some of us, it's mostly just a recreational hobby, and it's a good way to get exercise. But so this project, that's what we did. We tried to look at how it started in North Carolina, and how North Carolina's surfing was influenced from other players in the world, and how North Carolinians even went out and influenced the sport internationally. Now, some work had already been done by a few other people that we knew of anyway, down at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington. Peter Fritzler, who works at the Randall Library there on campus, they had done this Cape Fear Surfing Archive, and he actually worked a lot with Joseph Skipper Funderburk, who was a native of the Wrightsville Beach, who put together his own little book there on surfing on the Cape Fear coast. But their focus was getting the history on the Cape Fear area, and mostly the New Hanover County beaches. So we're talking Wrightsville Beach and Carolina Beach and Curie Beach, and in the Fort Fisher area. So that's where most of their focus was, but it was very beneficial to our research because they had already started covering some of that ground. And we met with them and we shared research, and they're really nice guys. And they had an exhibit in the library for a while about surfing in that part of the state. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the overall history of surfing throughout the world in general, but my main focus here is going to be North Carolina. But sometimes it makes sense if I kind of tie in some things here to the history of surfing itself worldwide. This was a artist depiction or drawing of Captain James Cook's third voyage, and he's at Hawaii here, or what, And in this picture, so the ships there are anchored. There's a lot of native people in and around the water. And if we zoom in, we see in that bottom kind of left area, there's a little depiction of someone on a surfboard. And this was from the 1700s. So the sport of surfing has been around for many, many, many years in some regions of the world. Most people believe it originated in Hawaii and Polynesia, but there are other places in the world where people were surfing. We just don't know how early because records weren't really well kept. But there's some places even on the coast of Africa where people were taking boards out into the water and surfing at an early period compared to here in North America anyway. But we don't really know because I mentioned records, and if it wasn't written down and people couldn't take pictures of it with their cell phone, how did we know it really happened? Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Another drawing here, and this is from a book that was by Francis Olmsted in 1841, and the book was titled Incidents of a Whaling Voyage. And he had a depiction that said Sandwich Islanders playing in the surf. And Sandwich Island is what we refer to as Hawaii today. But if you look on the left, I put this article that was printed in the North Carolinian in Elizabeth City, out of Elizabeth City in 1876. And it's titled Sandwich Islands Surf Bathing. And I'm gonna read the article to you. I'll try to skim through it here. But if you think about it, this is 1876, and you're from Elizabeth City, or you're from the area, and you get the newspaper, and you know that time period, and David could probably help me, people are vacationing in the Nags Head area. They're going to the beach. So they read this article, and it says, it was an account of what someone witnessed in the Sandwich Islands or Hawaii. So says a writer, it is very exciting, but the sea was not very rough. The surfboard is a rough plank shaped like a coffin lid, about 2 feet broad and from 6 to 9 feet long. The men, dressed only in mallows, carrying their boards under their arms, waded out from the rocks on which the surf was breaking, and, pushing their boards before them, swam out to the first line of breakers, and then, diving down, were seen no more till they reappeared as a number of black heads bobbing about like corks in the water. What they seek is a very high roller, on the top of which they leap from behind, diving face downward on their boards. As the waves speed on and the bottom strikes the ground, the top breaks in a huge comber. The swimmers appeared posing themselves on its highest edge by dexterous movements of their hands and feet, keeping just at the top of the curl, but always apparently coming downhill with a slanting motion. So they rode in majestically, always just ahead of the breaker, carried shoreward by its mighty impulse at the rate of 40 miles an hour, yet seeming to have a volition of their own, as the more daring riders knelt and even stood on their surfboards, waving their arms and uttering exultant cries. They were always apparently on the verge of engulfment by the fierce breaker, whose towering white crest was ever above and just behind him. But just as one expected to see them dashed to pieces, they either waded quietly ashore or, sliding off their boards, dived under the surf, taking advantage of the undertow, and were next seen far out at sea, preparing for fresh exploits. The great art seems to be to mount the roller precisely at the right time and to keep exactly on its crest, just before it breaks. They printed an article on how to surf and what to surf on, how to do it, how to catch the wave, how to ride the wave. 1876, out of Elizabeth City. So think about that. If maybe you're on vacation, you're out there, Nags Head, those early years, the formation of the tourism industry in Dare County, maybe you would have tried it. Why not? I gave you a description of the board, what it was shaped like, how wide and how long they could be. Why not go for it? You're out there having a good time anyway, probably swimming and maybe riding the waves just with your body. So we don't know. I mean, it very well could have happened. We can't say that it didn't, and we can't say that it did, but it's exciting to think about it. At least to me it is, because that's pretty early, 1876. Here's another one. Here's 1888. And this is a newspaper out of Edenton, North Carolina, the Fisherman and Farmer. And this man, Don Arturo, gives an account of surfing in Hilo, in Hawaii. It was while at Hilo, we saw the natives shooting the surf. This very exciting evolution is performed by a Kanaka going out into the surf armed with a thin board about 5 feet long and about 18 inches wide. And when an extra heavy swell rolls in, he turns his back to the sea, lays on the board, and is carried inshore with lightning-like rapidity. Probably not 40 miles an hour, like the other article stated, but pretty quickly. And Kanaka is referring to a person. It was a Hawaiian term for person in Hawaii. So it was referring to the native peoples of that region. I believe it has other meaning, maybe elsewhere, maybe in Australia. So when did surfing begin in North Carolina? I thought this was funny because I found a copy of this postcard from around 1910, and you can read the title of the postcard at the bottom. It's Surf Scene, Beaufort, North Carolina. And you look at the picture, there's nobody in the water. There's nobody surfing. But it doesn't mean that they weren't somewhere. They just happened to snap this picture. There's waves out there, but nobody's surfing. So when did it actually begin in North Carolina? It's hard to really say, but there is some evidence of some early records. Here's another postcard from the same time period, the surf bathing scene in Beaufort. Now the previous picture I showed was probably Atlantic Beach, if I had to guess. People were vacationing in Atlantic Beach in Carteret County at that time period, and even earlier. So here's a surf bathing scene, and I bet this picture is probably from Bird Shoals, which is right across Taylor's Creek on the other side of Town Marsh Island there. The water's shallow, there's not a lot of wave action, so nobody really surfing on Bird Shoals, but surf bathing maybe. And I love the picture because of the swimsuits and the outfits there, and what they're going into the water in. But people are surfing in this time period. We know this somewhere in the world. Who was the first person to surf in North Carolina? Who was? So I threw these pictures up here because I just wanted you to think about this. Riding a wave can be considered surfing. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it on a surfboard. Some people go body surfing. You're surfing the wave with your body, you're riding the wave. Well, maybe these people were riding the waves in these other types of craft. Here's a drawing from 1589 by John White in the upper left there. Native peoples of Carolina standing in a wooden dugout canoe. And if they ever took it into the surf, maybe they rode a wave on their way back in. We know these guys on the upper right, this is a whaling crew, a depiction of a whaling crew from Shackleford Banks. They went out and chased whales in those small little surf boats, or double-ended pilot boats, if you will. And they more than likely caught a wave on the way back in. If there was surf that day, it helped them get to the beach. And there's two people standing in that boat. So you got to have good balance, and it's kind of like they're surfing, right? There's a person on the bow, and then there's a person at the back with at the stern with a oar that's helping to steer. And then there's photographic evidence of people surfing in Kitty Hawk in the bottom picture. This picture was taken around 1900, and this is a U.S. life-saving station crew out of Kitty Hawk. And what they're doing is they're practicing using their surf boat. Similar type of craft to what the whalers use, but probably a little bit bigger. They use those to row out to shipwrecks and save people that were stranded on a shipwreck on the outer bar. So they had to row through the breakers, but then on the way back, which is what this picture is, they could catch a wave to come in. Now, life-saving crews were operating in North Carolina as early as 1874. So they could have been surfing their boats in on waves in 1874. And in this picture, I think I cropped the bottom out, but if you look at the bottom left, there was a crowd on the beach watching them, and people were living in that area at the time, and it was entertainment. People went out to watch the lifesavers practice their drills, whether with their surf boat or with the breeches buoy and the apparatus cart and the low gun. shooting the projectile. So it was something to do. You know, we think of entertainment today, we watch TV or, you know, listen to go to a music concert or something. Entertainment back then was a little different. You know, and recreation in general, maybe, you know, but a lot of the same recreation still occurs today. You think about, you know, surfing starting in those early years was done by people that had the time to do it. You know, if you had to work, and there's people that work today and they're missing the presentation, but if you had to work, you couldn't get out there and go surfing. So it was kind of a leisure activity. It was something that if you did, you know, if you had the time off, if you were vacationing at those places, you could go do it. You know, the natives in Hawaii and Polynesia, you know, it was something that was done as a recreation as well, but also something to get from point A to point B. They would use a board to paddle from one place to another, up and down the shore, maybe from one island to another. They could use it in their fishing exploits, paddle out to the reef, do some spear fishing, paddle back. So it's unique to a unique activity in itself. All right, who are these people up here? Why did I put them up there? You know, the question I'm asking is, when did people start surfing in North Carolina? Well, you know, most people credit, you have a definitive answer when you say, when did surfing come to, you know, United States or America? And people will say, well, George Freeth, pictured on the left there, introduced it to California and the West Coast in the summer of 1907. But even then, there's debate, because the three gentlemen on the right who were from Hawaii, who happened to attend the St. Matthew's Military Academy in San Mateo, California in the 1880s, supposedly were carved a redwood surfboard and took it out at the San Lorenzo River mouth in July of 1885 to go surfing, because that's what they grew up doing. That's how they had, passed their free time or leisure time. So there is record that someone else actually started surfing earlier than George Freeth in California. Now, George probably put on a show. He might have announced it to everybody and everyone else that was around and said, oh, this guy's going to do some surfboarding and he's going to put on a demonstration. Come on down and watch it. So maybe that's the only reason why everyone thought that he was the first one to do it. Whereas you had David Kawananakoa, Edward Kiliahonai, and Jonah Kahui Kalanai Naola. And I'm sure I murdered those names. I'm trying. There we go. She can do it. No one was there to watch them, maybe. And they went down to the coast. They carved their board out of wood and they went surfing. They weren't interested in having an audience. They just really wanted to go surfing, I guess. I don't know the complete story behind it, but so here's another newspaper clipping, and this is out of the western part of North Carolina, from Boone, and there is mention of people riding the waves along the Cape Fear coast in the 1890s. So we've been talking about tourism and people on vacation and going to the beach. Well, Mr. Holtzclaw from Watauga County spent several days down at Wrightsville Beach. And he mentions in there that all sorts and sizes were riding the waves during the entire day. But he didn't say anything about a surfboard. So maybe they were just body surfing. Maybe they weren't. Maybe they were on a surfboard and he just left that part out. I don't know. But when you read the article, you have to be skeptical when you're doing your research. And you have to kind of say, well, I don't know. Maybe. Said they were surfing the entire day or riding the waves. Doesn't necessarily mean they were on a board though. So, and even this postcard, this is from a postcard that was dated 1907, March 24th, 1907. And this is at the Seashore Hotel in Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina. And you look, bottom left, I'll circle it. Doesn't it look like that young boy sitting on a board of some type? Maybe he is. And even if he is, this picture looks a little bit weird to me. All those people, the way they're spread out, the angle of them compared to the beach and the hotel. You know, there was early forms of Photoshop, if you will, even in that time period. So can we say that, yeah, that's definitely evidence that someone was surfing in North Carolina in 1907? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, you know. So we're going to get into some concrete records here. And this fellow here on the right, his name is Alexander Hume Ford, and he's actually from South Carolina, but he moved to Hawaii, and he's actually considered the founder of the Outrigger Canoe Club at Waikiki Beach. But he would write articles, and these articles were published in literature and magazines and all over, and on the mainland in the United States. And here's one that he wrote: "Riding the Surf in Hawaii, Collier's Outdoor America." And he talks about how they do it. He gives pictures on the boards and then riding the waves. And that's in August of 1909. Well, this man here, this is Burke H Bridges. He's from Wilmington, North Carolina. He sees that stuff that Ford's publishing and putting out there. And so they try surfing at Wrightsville Beach, 1909. There's the evidence. He wrote a letter, and he wrote a letter to Ford. And I'm going to read his letter real quick here. This is a picture of Bridges when he was at UNC Chapel Hill. He went to school there. So I think by the time he tried surfing, I think he had already graduated. He was a young man, an adult, a college graduate, if you will. So he writes this letter in response to Ford's article. He says, "I was very much interested in your article entitled 'Riding the Surfboard,' which came out in Collier's Weekly. During the past summer, we tried this sport to a very considerable extent, but did not meet with any great success due to the fact that the boards did not have sufficient supporting ability to carry the weight of a man, except when reclining at full length on the board. Of course, in this case, the body was more or less submerged and therefore buoyed up by the water. I do not know whether this lack of success was due to the type of board used or the character of the surf on this coast. Most of the boards used here were made of juniper, a very light wood, 1.5 inches thick, 18 to 20 inches wide, and from 6 to 7 feet long. These boards would invariably stop and sink in every case where the passenger attempted to stand upright, although the balance was frequently maintained. The most successful efforts toward coming in erect were by small boys under 100 pounds in weight. The surf on this coast usually breaks within 100 to 150 yards of the shore, except in storms. So far, no one has been able to force a board out beyond the breakers in stormy weather. A pier is now being erected, which during the coming summer will enable us to obviate this difficulty. And if the waves here are sufficiently large or the wave speed sufficiently fast, we should be able to do all that can be done in other places. If you can give me information on the following points, I will thank you very much. What is the thickness and the weight of the usual Hawaiian surfboard? Are these boards made perfectly straight on the bottom, or do they curve up at the bow and sides? Has anyone ever come in standing up in this country? What is the average height and wave speed in the Hawaiian Islands? Are the waves there ridden at all before they break? If so, generally how far? Has the experiment of launching these boards from a chute ever been tried? Yours very truly, Burke H Bridges." And this was printed, his article, his letter was printed in the Pacific Commercial Advertiser in 1910, the following year. And in that article, which is posted there on the left, and has his letter in there, it states that Ford is sending on for a juniper board and is informing the Wilmington correspondent that the board is just right, although the Waikiki boys now go in for boards 2 inches thick, 8 feet long, pointed at the bow and tapering slightly at the stern. Anyone who has learned to ride and stand on a board at Waikiki can perform the same feat elsewhere. But Hawaii is the only place where rollers form and roll for a quarter of a mile without breaking. So there's our evidence that they're trying surfing in North Carolina as early as 1909. And I would never have guessed that, and being a surfer myself, but I never really gave it much thought. But once looking into it, there it is. He said they tried it. Now, the little boys had more success because they were lighter in weight. And the older I get, I realize why the younger kids are better than me now. But that's the evidence that we have. And in that same year, in September of 1909, this is out of the Wilmington Morning Star, "Sports on Labor Day, attractive program prepared for Lumina on Monday." The first event is a canoe race, and the second a swimming contest, while the third number will be the surfboard sports, always interesting and entertaining for spectators. So there it is, 1909. They're going to be doing surfing at the events at the Lumina. Here's a postcard of the Lumina on Wrightsville Beach. And again, it's a postcard. This picture seems a little weird to me. The beach seems really narrow. Are these people really even at this beach? I don't know. This postcard is from 1917. And you look circled there, someone definitely holding some type of board in the left side of that picture. It gets really weird because you look in the foreground and those people are in ankle deep water. But that one particular person seems to be floating in deeper water, yet closer to the shore. Maybe the people up front are on a sandbar. I don't know. So it's exciting to see that. So moving along throughout time, this was out of 1928 on the Outer Banks, the Virginia Dare Day festivities that I talked about. So surfing happening at Wrightsville Beach as early as 1909, maybe. What about the rest of the state? Well, in this article about the Virginia Dare Day, it says that the day will be celebrated too at Virginia Dare Shores in the shadow of Kill Devil Hills, made famous by the Wright airplane flights. The shores are a half a dozen miles distant from Roanoke Island across Roanoke Sound, and the program there will begin at 11 o'clock in the morning also, and will include a demonstration of surfboard riding by Willie Kayama, member of a troop of Native Hawaiians now at the shores. And this was a later picture of a separate event that occurred at Virginia Beach on the left there, but that's Willie Kayama and a member of the troop of Native Hawaiians. So they performed music, they did traditional dancing, and they did a demonstration of surfing, 1928 at the Virginia Dare Shores in Kill Devil Hills. So that's our earliest record of surfing in Dare County. But something may have been a lot sooner. So as we move into the 30s, we see things like this, how to make your own surfboard. It's getting some popularity in certain, parts of the country. The Home Workshop in this issue, Building Surfboards, Popular Science Magazine, mid-1930s. Here's another one, Better Ways to Build Surfboards. And it gives you step-by-step instructions on how to do it. This is the 1930s. So if you were so inclined and had some tools and the materials, when Burke H Bridges got a hold of some juniper wood, it wasn't that hard for him. His father owned one of the largest timber and lumber mills in the region down South Carolina. So he probably could have had his choice of whatever type of wood he wanted. So in the 1930s, just across the border in Virginia, we see people that are surfing there, and on the left, we see a father and son, and the little boy on the right, his name's Bob or Robert, and that's Mr. Holland, his dad, and that's in 1933. So he's surfing up in Virginia Beach on a little surfboard, and his dad's surfing on a big surfboard. Well, fast forward a little bit, and by 1963, Bob Holland is making forays down into North Carolina to go surfing down there. And that picture, 1963, in the upper right corner, is in Nags Head. And the picture was taken from a fishing pier, I think. And Mr. Holland even started a surfboard shop in Virginia Beach, but he also opened one up in Kill Devil Hills in the 1960s. And I had an opportunity to actually talk with him. He's passed away now, but he told me how he used to, in order to get from Virginia Beach to North Carolina beaches, he would just drive down the beach. He didn't come down through the mainland or anything. They got the car on the beach and they drove down the beach, through what would be Sand Bridge and the National Wildlife Refuge there, and through Corova and Corolla and on down to Kitty Hawk. He was into exploring and looking for places to go surfing. Obviously, there were people living in the area at the time. So why did I put this picture up? Well, so this is from the 1940s, and this is a postcard highlighting Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and they actually practiced their landings there on the beach. It was Onslow Beach today. But young men that were joining the military may have been originally from California and gone surfing in California. And then all of a sudden they're in the Marine Corps, and now they're stationed here in North Carolina. And they might have maybe they brought their surfboard with them or had it sent later, or maybe they found some way to get one while they were here. Kind of made them maybe a little nostalgic for being at home in California. And maybe they went surfing because they were stationed here. So if they were people that were in the military, that might have been bringing the sport to our coast as well. This was a pretty good one, pretty good find that our collections manager shared with me. 1950s, Morehead City, the summer capital of the South. There's fishermen in the upper left. There's a boat there sailing in the bottom right. A beauty contest. So there's swimming suits there. But look, the bottom right as well, there's someone on a surfboard, and it looks like they're probably out at Atlantic Beach. And that's unfortunately typically what the surf looks like in Atlantic Beach. It's pretty small, but they're out there nonetheless. That was from around 1950. So they were promoting surfing in the area. So I'm going to kind of bounce around up and down the coast a little bit, just show you some of the things that we came across in our research. This is a little newspaper clipping in the upper left out of the Coastland Times in Manio, 1951, the Kitty Hawk Craft Shop. And it's run by Phyllis and David Stick. And they're selling, besides other things, beanies, hammocks, driftwood lamps, juniper surfboards. 1951, they're advertising juniper surfboards for sale. Now, David Stick is in the picture here. He's on the left, holding a spear and a sheep's head. And his friend on the right is Tom Fearing, holding a spear and a sheep's head. Now, I put this picture in here because well before David and Phyllis opened up the Kitty Hawk Craft Shop and sold juniper surfboards, his friend Tom built a wooden hollow surfboard. So that probably would have been in the 40s, maybe even well, it probably was in the 30s actually. So Virginia Dare Day happened. Willie Kayama was there. He did a surfing presentation, and Tom Fearing's dad was on the board that set up the Virginia Dare Day festivities for that event. So Tom Fearing, a young boy, sees Willie Kayama surfing. He's like, I'm going to make one of those. I'm going to go surfing. He builds a wooden hollow board, and they probably ride the waves with it. Now, David Stick's entry in a much later Encyclopedia North Carolina says that mostly him and Tom used the surfboard for paddling out to nearby shipwrecks and going spearfishing. But I bet they rode some waves on the way back in. Unfortunately, Tom died in World War II. He was in an airplane. He was I don't know where he was stationed, but he was shot down in his airplane in World War II. David Stick went on to become a historian and writer and has many books about the graveyard, the Atlantic, and the Outer Banks. But they were some early pioneer surfers of Dare County. Moving into the 60s, we see activity like this. Here's a young boy that was down in New Hanover County, and he's on this inflatable rubber mat. And these were rented at the beaches up and down the coast and all over. You'd go to the beach for the day and you'd rent a mat for however much, and you would use it all day long riding the waves. Well, if your friend worked there at the rental stand where they had beach chairs and these inflatable mats, you would tell him and you would get him to like inflate it as much as he could to make it very hard so that you could stand on it. The harder the mat was, the more it was inflated, it made it easier to stand on and ride the mat in, just like he's doing, because surfboards for young boys like this were probably not something they were going to walk down the street and get. They were hard to get. They were probably pretty expensive. Most of the boards would have had to come from California. So in the early 60s, you might have seen something like this. And I talked to a lot of people in my research that this is exactly what they did. They started surfing by standing up and riding these mats. So this is the decade where Hollywood gets a hold of surfing and it really takes off, and movies start to come out. This is on the left, and out of the Coastland Times of Manio, 1965. They show this movie at the Pioneer Theater in downtown Manio, Ride the Wild Surf. Now, it's not really, it's kind of really a drama, and have a love story in it, maybe. I don't know. I've never actually seen it because that doesn't appeal to me. I just want to see the surfing, but it did have surfers and surfing in it. So that, that gets people really excited about the sport. And maybe this is about the time that Gidget is happening. These pictures were shared to me from someone in Elizabeth City. Him and his friends got some boards and they would go down to Nag's Head. This was in 1966. And they had a great time down at the beach, hanging out and playing in the water and doing some surfing. So a little closer to home here in Carteret County, here's I mentioned going down the street and getting a surfboard was pretty hard to do because no one was really selling them except for places like this. This is Atlantic Beach Surf Shop, the earliest version of it. And it was opened in 1964. And actually it was by three young boys, Tommy Morrow, Ben Horton, and Bobby Bartz. And they had ordered some boards from California, and then they sold them out of one of their fathers had an amusement equipment repair facility, and they were selling them out of there. Now at Atlantic Beach at the Circle, it was, historically was a amusement center, and there were rides and games and things like that. So these fellas were entrepreneurial and said, hey, let's sell some surfboards. This sport's really taking off. They weren't the only ones to do stuff like that. You may be familiar with Bert's Surf Shop. It's not really today. It's not really maybe considered a core place. But in the 60s, Bertram Pearson out of Kinston, he was an entrepreneur as well. He sold surfboards in his family's clothing store in the shoe section. Now, boards back then were long, 8-10 foot, and they were kind of taking up some space. And I think his parents were like, you got to move this operation. So he actually opened up his own shop down the street in an old paint shop there in Kinston. And he quickly realized that people are just driving by on their way to the beach. They're not stopping in Kinston. So he went and he opened up a place down in Emerald Isle and kind of bloomed from there. And so we had some people in North Carolina that decided they were going to take surfboard manufacturing into their own hands. So here's a couple of guys, Lank and Harold, team up and make East Coast surfboards out of Carolina Beach. And this was their order form. You could order a surfboard and they would make it for you. So surfboard design material was changing from wood to foam and fiberglass, a little easier to shape, not as heavy, a lot lighter for those bigger boards. But you could order, here's the price list. You could get a 9-foot board for $125. Some extras, you could throw in different colors on the board. So I thought that was pretty interesting. That was shared with me from the UNC Wilmington archives. Here's a couple other fellows from that area down there. Sonny Danner in the left image, and in the back on the right, and Herman Pritchard crouching there on the right-hand side image, making surfboards. This is down in New Hanover County, 1965. I don't know if OSHA would approve of their workshop there. He's in his bare feet, doesn't have a shirt on. He's smoking a cigarette. They're sanding away. They're planing the foam blank. They're sanding fiberglass, not wearing a mask. I would not recommend that, but anyway, that's how it was done for those guys in those early years. Here's Herman, practicing and using one of their homemade surfboards there. And it was great. I talked to some of these guys about this during our research project, and I loved hearing their stories and how they got into it. Here's their shop, Atlantic Surf Shop, custom surfboards by Dan Pree. That's Danner and Pritchard combined. A little beach cottage is what it was. And sometimes they made boards and people would buy them just because surfing was cool and popular. Hence the image that we see here. And people told me about stories of friends they knew that would get aboard and strap it to the roof of their car just to ride around and look cool and pick up girls. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the guys up on Hatteras Island, because eventually Hatteras Island would come to be known as the surfing mecca for anyone on the East Coast because of the quality of waves. But in those early years, there wasn't really much going on there. There was a few guys that took matters into their own hands, and I have a picture of a couple of them. There's the Smith and Holland surf shop up in Virginia Beach in the upper right, and I talked about Bob Holland, and he opened a shop in there in the Nag's Head in Kitty Hawk area. But way down on Hatteras Island, we had Buddy Hooper, John Connor, Doug Meekins, and John Ox, and they try out surfing in 1961, and they get hooked. One of them, Buddy Hooper, gets a surfboard from up in Virginia Beach, and then him and John Connor, they start experimenting with making their own boards. And I talked to Buddy, and he was like, we did this. It was under the tree in the front yard. But you think about making surfboards, and I draw this parallel to making boats. I got a picture of a nice sport fishing boat in there. But these guys, they were Hatteras Islanders, and they were very good at making many things, especially boats. And these were young boys, and they said, well, let's make surfboards. We can make boats. We can sure make a surfboard. And they did. And they made surfboards, and they sold them at Connor's Supermarket there in Buxton. That was John's parents had the supermarket there, and they were selling their surfboards. So that the boat there is actually one of the boats that Captain Buddy Hooper would do charters on, Hatteras Fever 2. He became a fishing boat captain. So I mentioned earlier about fishermen and surfers. A lot of the surfers from North Carolina are fishermen. But sometimes when the waves are good, they would rather be catching the waves instead of fishing and being on the pier. And they probably know some of the people on the pier. There's been kind of a up and down relationship maybe. So surfing starts to pick up in that time period. We see North Carolina's getting a lot of publicity in the magazines. Here's one out of Atlantic Surfing, and on the front cover there it says North Carolina. This was a picture out of that issue. Richie Verzal surfing down at Wrightsville Beach. This was the international surfing magazine. This was published throughout the world apparently, and they did a whole write-up on North Carolina. This was one of the pictures from that issue in 1966. Same with my title slide to this program, that was from this issue. And they basically were touting North Carolina as like the place to go, especially Dare County and Hatteras Island. So we see it really taking off. And these are just some pictures from some of these magazines in the 60s. Now here's one from Atlantic Beach. This is Bob Freeman here. The pier in the background still stands. That's the Oceanana. It's probably been rebuilt a few times since then because of hurricanes, but the picture was taken from the Sportsman's Pier, which no longer exists. And this was in 1964 in December. So you think about it, and you look at him and look at Bob, he's just got on shorts and a tank top, and it gets pretty cold in December, but that's what us crazy surfers do. We get out there no matter what. And this was from down at Fort Fisher, 1967, from one of those magazines. So it's catching on. You get these surf clubs forming. Here's the one at Kitty Hawk. And in this picture was interesting because one of the surfboard makers from that time period is in this picture, and his name's Don Bennett. Any relation? No? Okay. This was his shop in the background, Surfboards by Don. And supposedly, now someone told me that was him in this picture there in the white t-shirt. This is the one where they had the license plates made up, Surf Club Kitty Hawk. And what the plates were for was that across the street, there was Anderson Supermarket, and Bill Anderson would also rent surfboards, and he would allow people to park there if they became a member of the surf club, and they could park there at his, that's how, once they became a member, they got this license plate. There were clubs elsewhere too. This is from down in the South Island Surf Club down at Carolina Beach and Curry Beach area. And you can see in the front there at the bottom, there's some trophies. Well, just like anything, when people start to do something, could be anything, people make a competition out of it, right? And surfing was one of those. Here's people gathered in Kitty Hawk at an early surfing contest. So you just want to see who can ride the wave the best, who can do it the best. There's some results in this magazine, Surfing East, from the Nags Head Surfing Tournament. And because people started to realize that Cape Hatteras was such a good place for this sport, finally by 1974, the folks that run the United States Surfing Championships decided to hold them there in Buxton at the Lighthouse. 1974, and they actually did it again in 1978 and 1982. And the story was that the Californians and even some Hawaiians showed up to compete for this national championship in surfing, and they kind of brought the wrong boards. They were expecting very small, weak waves. They brought the wrong kind of boards for those conditions, and they were really surprised at what they experienced as far as the quality of the waves. And not to mention that they actually were beat out by surfers from the East Coast. I think one of those years it was someone from Florida that won, and then someone from New York that won another year. So they were kind of opening their eyes to the fact that the East Coast of the United States is, a good surfing destination. So this was the old post office, and that was there in Rodanthe and Waves, the general store and post office. You had to get creative, I guess, when surfboard making and selling was not a real lucrative business in the early years, but you did what you could. This was Hatteras Island Surf Shop, one of the earlier shops for selling surfboards on Hatteras Island. You can see some surfboards in the window, but it actually, I think it still had the picture had a U.S. Post Office still on the window as well. And here's one up the road from there, Whalebone Surf Shop, and that's always been a cool logo because you think about pirates and the coast of North Carolina and Blackbeard, and so they came up with a pretty catchy logo for theirs. So this was located on where 64 comes into Nags Head before you would turn south and head to Hatteras Island. It was kind of like a jumping off point, because at this time period in the mid 70s, there wasn't, most of the tourism was up there in Nags Head and Kitty Hawk and Kill Devil Hills, and anyone going on a surf adventure going down to Hatteras, there wasn't much there. They might stop in at a Whalebone and get some advice or get some pointers, and then further down a little bit later we had the Natural Arts Surf Shop. Now this is Scott Busby on the right. He was a surfboard maker, but he had to open his own shop, and what he opened his own shop in was an old burger joint. He said it still smelled like greasy hamburgers there in Buxton, but they had to, like I said, they had to be creative with where they were able to open up and sell their boards. So I wanted to put some of these, note some of these people and their contributions to North Carolina's surfing history. We move into the 80s. Mickey McCarthy on the left, he's probably more well known for his surfing photography, but he made surfboards as well. And the trade of surfboard making a lot of times is passed down, maybe not necessarily father to son or uncle to nephew or whatever, but passed down from someone that has learned it from someone else and passes it on to someone else, like Rasco Hunt that we see here in the bottom right. He learned his skills from Mickey and others, and he's pouring the resin onto the fiberglass cloth that would be over the foam surfboard. He's smoothing it out. Still not wearing a shirt, but at least he's got that respirator, that mask on because of those fumes. And then we have Debbie and Randy. They have their Rodanthe surf shop there in the village of Rodanthe. These were that was in just a little house that was there. But later on, eventually, sport becomes more popular, and we see things like this. Big surf shop. Now they carry all kinds of things, and flip flops and t-shirts and hats and coolers and sunglasses. This is our local here, if you will, Atlantic Beach Surf Shop, a much later image than the one I showed earlier from the 60s. But the magazines are still promoting North Carolina. Here's one from 1989. Cape Hatteras goes off, and had a 4-page spread on dancing in the graveyard, referring to the graveyard of the Atlantic, if you will. So the sport of surfing had just taken off really, and the boards changed, the materials changed, the types of maneuvers and things that they could do changed. Here's a picture from up in Dare County. You're launching off of the top of the wave, catching air like you're on a skateboard or you're on a pair of skis, and coming back down and landing on the wave and continuing riding. Those are still, those are pretty impressive maneuvers. Didn't have too many pictures of women getting into the sport, but they very well did. And especially nowadays, it's become popular with everybody. Doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. You get out there, and this was from a competition down at Wrightsville Beach, surfing competition that was held there. And I wanted to end with, there's still new uncharted territories, if you will. This is a chart there of the Diamond Shoals off of Cape Hatteras. And if you're able to see it closely, it says that, that the soundings for the shoals is not listed on the chart because they change too often. But the soundings are usually, 6-9 feet. So very shallow sandbars off of Cape Hatteras. And there was a hurricane, I think it was in 2007, maybe. I think it was Hurricane Noel. And there was this situation where some of the local surfers from Hatteras Island were able to get out there on a jet ski and tow surfers into some of these waves. And they said that essentially they were surfing diamond shoals. And they said that the surfers experienced waves of 15 to 25 feet, some maybe 30 foot. So still not as big as, places in Hawaii or even pushing some of the ones in California, but not the Cortez Bank off of California. And then now there's a place in Portugal where all the big wave surfers are headed nowadays, Nazaré, 80-foot waves. But for North Carolina, this was pretty impressive. And I took a screenshot from video or still photos of that day. And I don't know where the picture was taken from, if it was from a boat or from the jet ski or what, but this was a picture from that day, and you can barely kind of make out the trail that a surfer left behind as they were pulled behind a jet ski by a tow rope and then let go of the rope and go down into that wave. So if the surfer's about 6 foot max, that's easily a 15 to 20 foot wave, and especially the one behind it off to the right. So when you hear people say, "Oh, people don't surf in North Carolina," you can't do that. It does happen, and it's been happening for many years, as we just learned. But for the most part, it's something that people get out to do, to have a good time and enjoy with their friends and maybe their children, pushing them into the waves. So that's why I ended with this shot here, back from the 60s, and the young adults were out on the beach for the day and had a good time. I need to put these list of people up to thank them, because these are people that helped us with this research project in the North Carolina surfing history. They contributed photos, They told me their stories. They shared their experiences. They put me in touch with other people. And I probably left somebody off of there on accident, but hopefully I got them. And that's all I have for North Carolina's surfing history. Thank you for coming to the presentation. Thank you for watching online. And because you guys came in today, make sure you get some copies of this. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So he, you can see his sister's name on here, Lisa, and I worked closely with her on this project. She actually is involved in the Buddy Pelletier Surfing Foundation, and they footed the bill for printing this. So it's an educational project. We don't sell these, we give them away for free. And that was the stipulation. And she shared a lot of information and stories with me about Buddy. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of other documentation on him, but there is a surfing foundation in his name that supports efforts like rebuilding after hurricanes in surfing communities, giving scholarships to students that compete in surfing contests locally and then go on to college, humanitarian aid, so many things. And they used to have an annual contest where it was a fundraising event. The last one was last year, doesn't happen anymore. But Buddy Pelletier was a professional surfer. So it's kind of weird for maybe some people to think of that you could actually be a professional surfer and compete and get sponsored by surfboard manufacturers, surf shops, swimsuit manufacturers, wetsuit manufacturers. You get sponsored, some of them even pay you. Now, in the early years of professional surfing, you probably had to have some other job, and he probably had some other job. But he competed around the world, and he became renowned for his surfing skills. And he was, when he would compete in a contest, people would start cheering before he even was riding the wave. If he just went to start paddle for the wave, because they wanted to see Buddy and what he could do in these tricks and these maneuvers. And he would be riding one way with going forward, and he'd hop up and spin around on the board and still be going the same way down the wave, switching stances. That's really difficult to do on a surfboard, let alone while you're doing, riding in the tube or the barrel. Anyway, he was a phenomenal surfer. He eventually moved to Puerto Rico and competed there a lot, but he did pass away. I believe he had cancer. So he wanted to do something. He wanted to have this foundation that was, that supported surfers and helped them. And there's many other foundations that do those types of things, and others that are here in North Carolina are some that help with the autism community, getting children and people with autism out on surfboards. Surfers Healing is one. They get handicapped people and they ride with them on a big surfboard on the wave, and it does a lot for them emotionally and psychologically. So there's all kinds of there's a Surfing Warriors project with working with veterans that have been through combat and have PTSD. Surfing is an activity that is very helpful for them. So yeah, thanks for coming to the presentation today. Yes, sir.
I noted on the first photo was somebody who was surfing during a hurricane.
Yes.
And when I was growing up, there were people here that were so obsessed with surfing that as soon as word got out the tropical system was approaching, while everyone else was in grocery stores buying their milk and bread, the surfers were headed for the beach. And a guy who lived across the street from us when I was growing up was that kind of a surfer. And I remember he said one day, "I'm not passing up those waves." And much to the dismay of emergency managers and law enforcement people, you would have people on the old Atlantic Beach Bridge back when it used to be a draw bridge.
Yeah.
That would be headed off the banks to evacuate. The surfers would all be heading on the beach.
Yes.
Just to surf for a while. And I know a couple of guys, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Apocalypse Now.
Oh, yeah.
Colonel Kilgore,
Mhm.
the guy who was so obsessed with surfing, he had guys surfing while there was an attack
Yeah.
going on.
There's artillery going off.
Exactly. And he coined the famous phrase, Charlie don't surf.
Yeah.
I know a couple of guys like that around here, so your presentation has been a very good one.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I mean, I'm guilty of that myself of, okay, do I prepare for the storm or go get some of these waves? Because, the reason being that it's not often that the waves get that good and those large, I didn't really delve into the science and the physics of waves and the formation and what makes them good and when do we get the good ones. But, hurricanes and nor'easters are our big producers of the really good quality surf here in North Carolina and on the East Coast in general. With little wind events, like a southwest wind can blow up and we'll get what we call a wind swell, where the local immediate winds generate shortly lived surfing opportunities. But the hurricanes, as they're traveling from so far away, are sending the swells hundreds and thousands of miles across the ocean, and they're getting here well in advance of the storm. But there's always that fine line of how much surf can I get in before I really need to start preparing the house and putting the plywood on the windows kind of deal. Thank you, and thanks for coming to the presentation. Any other questions on it? Enjoy your visit. Definitely check out the exhibit in the gallery and get you a copy here. So I don't know if we had any questions on Facebook or anything. Or, okay. All right. Stop recording.